Therefore, if a request for notification is received by the Clerk's Department, they will notify persons as required by the Planning Act. And in addition, persons will be notified of any council meeting at which it is proposed that a decision will be made by council on an active matter and no other notification will be given. The Township has made available other ways in which residents may keep themselves aware of matters being considered by council. These include calling your ward councillor, checking the Township website, reading committee and council agendas, which are available in the Clerk's Department at Town Hall, usually by no later than a Friday prior to a committee or a council meeting, or by calling the Clerk's Department to inquire as to the status. Thank you for your cooperation and your understanding. So tonight we're going to start off. We have our consultant planner, Ms. Liz Howson. She's going to give us a summary of what we're proposing. Any persons wishing to make an oral written submission on the report should give their name, address, and postal code to the clerk and ask their questions through myself, the chair, or file a written submission. Now, there's a sign-in sheet you'll notice on the desk outside, the reception desk, so if you want to be kept in the loop, if you will, about any information, please sign that before you leave tonight. So I'll mention that again at the end of the meeting. So, all right, Ms. Howson, off you go.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of committee. I'm going to talk a little bit about where the C3 zone is currently applied, give you some context with respect to the policy framework, because the zoning basically has to conform with the policy framework of the township. So it's important to understand where we're starting from. I'm going to talk about the current C3 zone format and some of the issues that we've been having with that current zone, and then outline briefly the proposed amendments and next steps. So on the screen you can see the area in yellow, which is the current C3 zone, or the areas that are affected by the current C3 zone. These are concentrated in the downtown. And in fact, you can see outlined in red the area which is regarded as the downtown in its entirety. The planning system, and this is sort of going back to the policy framework, the planning system starts in Ontario with the Planning Act. It provides the legal framework for planning in Ontario. It's what's called a policy-led system. And Uxbridge, Lucky Uxbridge, is subject to almost every major provincial policy document. And those provide the basis for the township official plan, which in turn establishes a specific direction that we use to establish the zoning regulations, and that includes for the C3 zone. This map is the land use schedule from the official plan, and you can see outlined in red the area which is subject to the C3 zone. That, in the official plan, that area is designated main in the C3 zone, and it sets out the permitted uses, which is quite a range of uses. And new development is to complement the existing development. You're allowed to have adaptive reuse of existing residential buildings. In fact, it's encouraged rather than tearing down the building. Specific criteria for new development, and you can see them up there. I'm not going to read them, but the critical one, and the one that's being raised most frequently in the public comments, is the height of the building. So the official plan, in fact, establishes that you need a minimum height of 2 stories and a maximum, and you're allowed to have a maximum height of 4 stories in the downtown. There are ways to get that height increased if you do certain things, but generally that's what we're looking at, between 2 and 4 stories in the downtown. There's some other policies that talk about the kind of design of buildings. They're found in the policies called Community Design Strategy in the official plan. And the other thing that we need to be aware of is that there are areas in the downtown which are subject to flooding. and there are then restrictions on uses in those areas. Some of those areas, of course, with the new culvert will be removed from the floodplain, and we've addressed that in the zoning bylaw. We've increased the area in the C3 zone, taken it out of the hazard land zone, put it in the C3 zone, but we put a hold on it until that culvert is built, and we know for sure what land is not subject to flooding. There's a number of other policies and guidelines that we have to be aware of, which are listed on the screen, but they don't have the same legal status as the official plan. They're just things that council has established to try and guide development in the downtown, and that they have regard for, but they just don't have the same weight as the official plan. In terms of the existing C3 zone format, it's a pretty standard format for a zone regulation. So you have a section that sets out the permitted uses. You have regulations for the permitted residential and non-residential uses. You have regulations for permitted retail gasoline establishments. You have planting strip requirements. You have general zone requirements, and then you have a series of special zone requirements that are applicable to individual lots or several lots where there has been a specific proposal and there's been a specific set of regulations developed in response to that proposal, which differ from the general regulations. The kind of issues that we've been dealing with the C3 zone, which was originally established in 1981, so it's been a while, and it's served the township well, but there have been some irritations over the years. So the permitted uses in particular have been a concern. It literally lists, you know, butcher, baker, candlestick maker, and if you come in with something that doesn't fit under that particular set of lists, you're out of luck. You've got to go through a rezoning. That isn't really in keeping with the direction in the official plan. You want a mix of uses here. You want a variety of uses. So we're proposing to change that specific list of permitted uses to something more general, so that people can come in, they don't have to fit under a specific use. They can go ahead. If they have a commercial use or they have an office use, they can go ahead regardless of what that commercial or office use is. Height differ from what's in the official plan, so we need to bring those in line. Same thing with the maximum coverage. It establishes, there's a bylaw called 9159, which for some reason is just floating out there. It's not part of the C3 zone. It just somehow got passed, and if you don't know to look for it, and you have to, in fact, I have to myself go to the clerk's department to get a copy of it because it's just not part of the bylaws. So we needed to get that rectified and consolidated in. There were some regulations which conflicted with the policies, and then there's the whole issue with the culvert, so that there was a need to take the C3-2 zone, which is an exception zone, and expand that to cover these areas that will come out of the floodplain when the culvert is built, and to put a holding zone on it so that we get we're ready to go basically when the culvert's finished. There's also some of the exception zones were pretty complex and perhaps unnecessarily so. And then there were some site-specific issues that were raised by property owners that needed to be resolved, again, with respect to exception zones. So the objective was to come up with a new, simplified, but more effective C3 zone, which better reflects the directions in the official plan. And one of the first things we are proposing is to actually rename the zone so that you know exactly where it's supposed to apply. and also to permit some residential uses in non-residential buildings, including on the ground floor. Right now, you can't have residential uses on the ground floor, which is a worthy objective, but when you get a mixed-use building, there may be some cases where you want to allow some residential uses. We also generalized, as I said, the permitted non-residential uses, so that pretty well anybody who conforms with the official plan can come in without having to go through an amendment. We do permit all lawfully permitted existing uses, so that if somehow or other in this change somebody got left out, I mean, I don't know how that would happen, but it might. So they aren't going to lose their legal status if they're there and they're lawfully existing. We also put in some regulations, including to permit expansion of those lawfully existing buildings or structures, subject to the new regulations. And of course, all new buildings and structures will be subject to the new regulations. Those regulations, basically the minimum lot area and frontage are 0 meters, so there's really no restriction. The minimum yards are 0 meters, except where they abut a residential or environmental protection zone. And there is a maximum yard requirement on Brock, Toronto, or Main Street, because we want the buildings to come up close to the street in those cases to support the pedestrian feel of the area. The minimum building frontage on Brock Street West, 30% of it is to be comprised of windows. There's the minimum height and maximum height, as I mentioned. We have a minimum floor space index and a maximum floor space index instead of coverage. This has to do with the volume of the building, so that it lines up again with the type of development we want to see. And we're not so much concerned with coverage, but we're concerned with what the building looks like. Open storage is prohibited in the front or exterior side yard. There's a maximum lot coverage for open storage. It has to be screened, and a seasonal garden center doesn't require screening, but it can't be located in a required parking space. Parking, the surface parking area, not including a driveway, shall not be permitted between the building and the front lot line. Again, we want the building to come up to the street, so that there's a relationship to the street. And the garbage and recycling storage has to be located in a wholly enclosed building. That can be an accessory building, or it can be in the main building. We've refined the exception zones, including eliminating certain zones which are no longer applicable. So I mentioned we expanded the C3-2 zone and put a hold on it. And we've exempted C3 zone uses from the general loading regulations, because in this kind of area it's very, very hard to get a full loading space. And in most cases you don't need it. So this is the revised zoning map. You can see it, the area in yellow is fairly similar. The biggest difference is the C3-2 zone. But if you look closely, which you can't because it's too far away, but you'll see there has been some changes in the exception numbers and the areas that are subject to exceptions. So the next step will be to review any public input we get tonight, or I think probably we're going to give 2 weeks. The chair will say what his ruling is on that, but we'll give 2 weeks for written input probably, and then we'll consider that, and we'll then bring forward a revised bylaw to council for adoption. That's my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Housen. So we'll start with the committee. Any questions to Liz? Dave, go ahead.
So Liz, thanks for coming in. Obviously, this is very critical for where we want to be in a decade and maybe even 5 years, depending on how quickly things move. My question is in the sections that we've left out. So there's a section of RM in the zoning bylaw. That one, right there, the RM. Now, from what I understand, C3 will allow RM, right?
That's correct.
So while we're doing this, would it not make sense to switch some of those RMs to C3 just to allow for, things like, if someone bought those properties and then made, a higher density residential, allowing for some retail on the lower levels?
We could do that. I think that location is such that the chance is slim, which is why I didn't change it, but we could certainly do that if you want to have that flexibility.
Yeah, just depending on where things go with the rail station, that might become more of a destination, and yeah. Anyway, just something to think about.
Actually, that's a good point. That's a very good point.
Okay,
So.
Thanks. I'll see if I can make another one as well. Okay.
I'm keeping score.
Okay, good, thanks. The other one, and we're just trying to look up the zoning now, but if you go further north, just past the Catholic Church, north of the Catholic Church, and that's the CF on your map. I'm looking at a different document here, but just, north of the CF, there's the RM there, but then as you get to the dead-end section of Toronto Street, there's some older houses there some of them are multi-residential, and some of them are just, single residential there. In terms of the use, I might have to go closer because I can't see that far.
Maple Street and Toronto Street North. That.
Oh. Talking about the Maple, I was talking about the extension of Toronto Street. I might get out of my chair, just so we make sure we're talking about the same thing.
So that's a potential. Now, we did have a citizen, who's no longer a citizen, but a citizen who suggested that this RM here, which is south of the Hobby Horse, so whether that should be changed to C3. And so what we did in that case is we sent them a separate notice when we sent out the notice for this public meeting saying, this is what we're thinking about.
Yeah.
Give us your thoughts.
Yeah.
Because we assume, since there's a C3 north of them and a C3 south of them, that maybe they wanted to be RM. Now,
Yeah.
I don't think we've heard anything back. Have we, Debbie? Do you know? No. No. So it may be that with these ones that we want to contact them or send a notice out before we make the change.
Okay.
But certainly I didn't have a problem with changing the other one to RM. It was just, I thought, reach out to these folks and let them know what we're thinking about before we actually do it, because they may have some reason that they prefer to keep RM.
Yeah, okay. Sure. Thanks, Gord.
Just for RM, it's actually a misnomer. It should be MR, which is multi-residential, which is like duplex, triplex, small apartment buildings, anything where you got stacked townhouses, that's all RM. So it's actually MR, so think of it that way. So, any other questions from committee? Councillor Garrett? You look very pensive over there. So. Councillor Beach? You're good? Councillor Pop?
I'm good, thank
you. Yeah. Councillor Rowe? Okay, we'll open it up to the general public, so you can either come and have a seat at the front desk, or there's a mic, Or I'm sure Ms. Housen won't mind you standing next to her and ask a question, so. Just give... Oh, the wireless, that's even better, so. We can go into the crowd. I love that TV.
And, Gord, can I just speak while we're getting the mic ready?
Yeah, absolutely.
So folks, this process will be way better if we hear from you. So if you have ideas on how we should move forward, this is the perfect time to speak. So please feel open to do so.
Gord, just in the way of maybe stimulating, and Bob, if you don't mind me calling out Bob Curvin, I know there was questions as far as Trinity Church and the property behind it. Do you have any issues with that?
Trinity United Church is having a board meeting tomorrow night at 7:30, and we'll be discussing the future of the property. So I'll bring this up tomorrow at the meeting at 7:30.
Mr. Chair, I've made my position. I've sent in a letter to the township clerk to say I support this proposal, and I like what I'm hearing about expanding the C3 zone.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, I was gonna, yeah, that'd be easier.
I will say. Thank you, sir. Anyone else want to? Jim? Maria? No other input? Mr. Varley?
I think
You're also a citizen.
to Mayor Dave, if they have site-specific questions that they'd rather speak directly with our planner, maybe they could do that offline too, if there's that option.
If people have, site-specific, I own this property, what can I do? Liz will stay for a few minutes after the meeting and answer any and all questions. Liz?
Yes, it's essentially the same. There was a clarification added for the hobby horse, in response to the submission, just something to clarify the intent of the bylaw as requested. And there was a couple other changes, and that was it.
Okay,
So if there's no other questions, go ahead, Gordon.
okay. So there's a sign-in sheet, as I mentioned, out on the desk outside, so if you want to be kept aware of what's going on, please fill that out before you leave tonight. I'm going to give 2 weeks for written submission, so if you wake up in the middle of the night and you say, gee, why didn't I ask that question, then feel free to send that in. So that's why it's there for 2 weeks. So, that's it. Any other questions? Any other business? Oh, I'm sorry, Roger. I knew you were here. I knew you were waiting, so.
Well, I was just waiting to be called on, that was all. Through you to Ms. Housen, you had one line in there, adaptive reuse of existing residential building encouraged. In plain English, Ms. Housen, that means that residential houses along Main Street, along churches, will be encouraged to become commercial retail?
That is perfectly correct.
Okay. Looking at your map, there are areas zoned C3, and there's C3-2, C3-4. Does the purpose of this rezoning thing, does that make all of that C3?
So it's all C3 now, and some of the land isn't. It's been added to C3, but when you see a dash afterwards, it's an exception zone. So some of those exception zones have been removed, and they land as C3. Some of them have been, like the C3-2, have been extended and changed. So it's all C3, but there are variations in the C3.
And those dashes mean some kind of exception. If somebody, if a retailer downtown is a C3-2 and just want to be C3, do they have to now apply for a rezoning?
So if they couldn't actually do anything before. They were in the floodplain, so they could only use their existing building. They couldn't do anything. So what happens with this new change is they will be able to, which they couldn't do before, once the culvert is in place. What they will have to do, well, actually, they may not even have to do it. So once the culvert's in place, we may lift that holding zone. If we have enough information, we may be able to lift it. The township may be able to lift it themselves. No, the -2 is restricting, giving a special set of regulations, except in that particular case, it's also to allow it to have the hold on so that we can lift the hold once the culvert's built. But lifting the hold is not the same as having to go through a full rezoning. There's nobody who can appeal the lifting of the hold, except for the landowner themselves. If council refuses for some reason to lift the hold, they can appeal that. But nobody else can appeal that, and it's a much simpler process to go through. You don't have to have a public meeting, for instance. If you're coming in, you just make your application. It comes through council. Council say, yep, okay, all the conditions have been met. Good, we lift the H. You give notice that you're lifting the H, but there's no public meeting. There's no public input, so it's much more speedy.
If I may, just one last question. Just one last question. The story, the question of the height of buildings, it's been discussed here in council just recently, and the 4-story maximum was mentioned, but there was some mutterings about, well, you might want to go to 5 in some instances. Would that still be possible?
That is still possible. So under the Planning Act, and you'll recall I said everything comes from the Planning Act, there is an ability to bonus. It's called bonusing. And you put policies into your official plan that say you're going to bonus, and there's certain things that you can get in return for giving people some extra height and some extra density. And so if they say that they're going to do that, whatever it is, then you can say, yeah, I'll give you, another floor or another 2 floors. So there is a process where people can get extra height and density.
Any final questions? Councillor Garrett, we'll go to you first.
Kind of weird to talk to a mic when you're right beside me, but the fire station, the fire station on Bascom, did it fall into the C3? I just can't follow it up there.
It looks like it on the map. But I think it may, but I'll have to check.
Okay. So we'd want to...
The mayor says it does.
So, again, when I looked at this map,
it's just hard to,
it's tough to
yeah.
tell, but so, to me, it looks like the fire station is in, but the music hall's out. The way it looks to me. But, Liz, before we finalize this, I think you and I should go for a walk through our downtown and just make sure that we take a good look and confirm that what we're doing makes the most sense.
That sounds like a great idea, especially now that the weather's improving.
Yeah, I'll buy the coffee.
Any other questions? Mayor Barton, did you have a question?
The other question would be to Liz, and this is about, when we're done, can you explain the process? We finish the culvert construction, when are we lifted out of the floodplain, and who determines the fact that we're lifted?
So, you finish the culvert construction. The Conservation Authority is the one who will decide what and how you can lift the H. We've identified an area that we believe will be out of the floodplain once the culvert is finished, and I don't know what they're going to exactly have to do, but they're the ones who are going to have to say, yes, you're right, all of that area is good, or, well, no, actually now we see how this is working, maybe this corner can't come out or can't come out yet. So it's left, I mean, you're the one who has to lift the H, but you're going to need some input from the Conservation Authority to make sure that you're really should be lifting the H.
Okay, and an example of that, just from from conversations that we've had here, the south side of Brock on the Centennial Drive portion would still be in the H when we're finished, from what I understand. So everything at the top of Brock would be fine, everything on the back side of Southern Brock would not be. Do you want to clarify that, or are you just nodding your head and agreeing?
Then you've just given a perfect example. So the Conservation Authority presumably will tell you, yes, Mr. Mayor, you're absolutely correct. That little part can't come out, and it's got to stay there, maybe indefinitely, maybe not. Maybe what they'll say is, yeah, but if you do this and this, it can come out.
Okay.
And depending on what this and this costs, you may decide that you want to do that.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah. So there's no reason that we cannot, and we've done it on other sites, where we take the H off part of a site and we leave it on the rest of the site. So you can absolutely do that, and in this case you absolutely, like if the Conservation Authority is not giving you the go-ahead, then you can't lift the H.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification.
Any other questions? Seeing none, again, please sign up before you leave this evening. Anybody who wants further notice should leave your name, address, and postal code on that sheet of paper. As I mentioned, I'm going to give 2 weeks for submissions and ask if there's any other business. Oh, item of correspondence. Could I get a motion to receive that, please? Councillor Beach. We don't need a seconder, do we? No? All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Any other business? There being none, then I need a motion to adjourn. Councillor Beach. All in favor? Carried. Thank you all for coming this evening. I appreciate it.